On Story is brought to you in part by the Alice Clayburgh Reynolds Foundation, a Texas family providing innovative funding since 1979. On Story, presented by Austin Film Festival, a look inside the creative process from today's leading writers and filmmakers. This week's On Story, the Motorcycle Diaries screenwriter Jose Rivera.
I don't have problems inventing or ignoring, huge parts of history. I am crafting an original work of art, and I need to do what I need to do. The Motorcycle Diaries is a creative piece of art. It's not history. It's not even biography, I don't think. It's really its own work.
In this episode, Jose Rivera discusses bringing Che Guevara's moving memoir to the big screen with director Walter Salles.
The Motorcycle Diaries was a huge awakening for me for many reasons. One of them, and because I had done so much theater, is that you can be the writer of a film but not its author. And that ultimately Walter Salles was the author of this film, even though he didn't write anything, but that it was his vision and his storytelling instinct that we were to follow, not mine. So that was probably the first lesson. And the other was the old cliche that a film is written 3 times, and there was my script on the page, there was the film that we shot, and then there was the film that we cut. And there were 3 distinct pieces of work. And so that is both a humbling and also a quite liberating feeling as well. The first time I met Gael Garcia Bernal, we met for lunch with Walter and a few other people, and Gael's a tiny guy. He's little. And I thought, oh, he really can't play Che. He's too small, he's too boyish, and he has this very impish quality to him. And I was like, oh man, I don't know about this. And then the first time he sat on a motorcycle, he looked like a kid on a rocking horse or something, It's like, oh, this is never gonna work. But the great thing about, I think, the way Walter shot the film and Gael's sort of personal journey in this story is that you really see him grow. You see the actor grow, from the beginning of the film to the end, and you see the character grow as well from boyhood to manhood, and that's sort of like one of those intangible, unplannable things that happen in movie making. The idea really was to create and observe a person in 3 dimensions so that nothing can be ignored. Like his sexual appetite couldn't be ignored any more than his political desires and appetites. So, it really was a matter of understanding that the road trip was the mechanism, the political awakening was the theme, and the sort of sexual escapades were like the notes along, in the score of this piece, and along with humor and basically up and having a love-hate relationship with the motorcycle itself, So all these things sort of became part of the mixture. I'll say that the screenplay I wrote was far sexier than the film we shot. There were several more instances of Ernesto and various women, but it was, 2 attractive young guys, and so there was more of that in the screenplay that Walter decided either not to shoot or after these scenes were shot decided to cut for whatever time or rhythm, whatever those editing reasons were. One of the criticisms that I did read about the film, and I agree with this criticism, was that Ernesto is a little saintly. You know, he is kind of perfect. He seems to do the right thing all the time. You know, there's a scene where Ernesto sleeps with the prostitute that his friend has his eye on, and they go to bed together, and Ernesto gets an asthma attack. And his friend is listening outside the door, and he hears like Ernesto breathing really heavily, and he gets really happy for his friend, thinking he's getting laid, but in fact he can't do anything because of the asthma attack. So scenes like that, I think, humanized him, kind of knocked him off the pedestal that unfortunately too many people put him on, and I think our film does also put him on a pedestal. But you know, for various reasons having to do with the rhythm of the film and the tone. You know, when Walter objected to, for instance, having comedy in certain parts of the film where he felt that the tone was different. And so these scenes were lost, but they were part of my original concept. Like all good screenwriters, I am still a disciple of the 3-act structure. And so in my diligence in terms of research and stuff, I'd written a 30-minute act 1 to the film. And it had scenes with the family, it had scenes at the medical school, it had scenes playing rugby, scenes with the two guys hanging out, and a ton of backstory. You know, the father's an engineer, the mom is this bohemian who was among the first women in Buenos Aires to wear pants in public, who smoked cigarettes, and this interesting family dynamic where the father especially was incredibly protective of Ernesto. All that was written, all that was shot. And then in the editing room, we would watch these scenes, and as good as they were and as happy as we were with the way they looked, it was like, can we just get on the road already? Can we just cut this and just get to the fun part? And it was a shock to me. And I remember sitting with Walter, and he says, look, we have to lose act 1. Your act 1 has to go because it's just not working. And so we came up with this compromise where we would use some footage from act 1 and this new prologue, this new voiceover, so, the pilots, Granado, the co-pilot, me, the method, improvisation, the destiny, and all those things came after the fact. And we married them to the existing footage that was shot, which all were parts of much longer scenes that actually you will never see. And so that's how Act 1 was written. It went from a 30-minute or 30-page Act 1 to basically 5 minutes.
¿Ernesto se va de viaje?
No, Ernesto se queda.
Ernesto, ¿me lo llevas? Vamos juntos. Dale.
Mira, viejo, lo siento, pero por más que me digas...
Por favor, Ernesto, te faltan solo 3 materias para recibirte de médico, ¿eh?
¿Y eso puede esperar? Estudiante de medicina. Especialista en lepra.
And it was a huge lesson for me as a screenwriter, I have to say, because I love a nice, long, slow build-up. I do it in the theater all the time, and it's very satisfying. And I realized for this particular film that was just not working. I mean, I had known it already intellectually, but because I'd never had the experience of having a movie made, I didn't understand how that theory worked in practice. And so working in practice, and not that I helped Walter cut this film, but I sat with him as he cut it and made suggestions, and we watched things together, and we figured things out. And that was a huge piece of education for me.
Ella dice que nunca ella ha conocido escuela ni colegio porque siempre ha estado al lado de los ganados y por eso no sabe hablar castellano, solamente quechua. Desde que he crecido, a lo menos antes, alcanzaba a mi manera de pensar para todo. su plata, pero ahora hay creo poca plata y no hay trabajo.
So Walter Salles' background is in documentary films, and he's a huge believer in the art of the accident, of stumbling across things that you'd never expected to find. And he was always ready to find those things as he was shooting the Motorcycle Diaries. This scene does not appear in the screenplay. And he was just walking around one day with the cast and with a camera and the DP, and came upon these women, these indigenous women, and said, do you mind if we just improvise the scene with you? You know, just talk to us. You don't have to be an actor. You can just say whatever you want. And so that is that scene. And I put it in there just because it's another illustration of like how, you know, you write a certain piece, but then the kind of organic necessity of filmmaking takes over. And this became an irresistible moment for Walter as a filmmaker. And it is, you know, even though I never scripted it, it does fit in with one of the things we were really anxious to do, was to incorporate as many voices and faces and cultures in our story as possible. The second draft of the screenplay began with one word. It said faces. And then it says, you know, a gallery of the faces of South America. You know, young, old, black, indigenous, white, rural, urban. And that was like the first paragraph of the screenplay, which Walter didn't use in the beginning, but ended up using towards the end with those amazing photographs that he puts in. So finding these women and those faces definitely was thematically consistent with the film we wanted to make. I think, you know, we were working with a very large theme, which is, you know, how does consciousness grow with experience, and how does the road specifically contribute to that growth? So within that, I mean, that's a very broad canvas. Many, many different kinds of things can fit in, including, you know, indigenous women, including, you know, a sexual liaison. I mean, all kinds of things can be part of that. So we were lucky to have been working with a theme that could bear the weight of those kinds of stories, you know, and those kinds of like chance encounters.
¿Sabes? Silvia es una paciente un tanto rebelde, y si no se opera el cubital, corre el riesgo de perder su brazo.
It's one of the few scenes that could have been in a play. You know, it's just talk. It's two people talking. And it is the beginning of a relationship that I find really fascinating. In Ernesto's book, the character is a man named Silvio. And I decided to make it a woman, and I decided to also have a kind of undercurrent of sexual attraction between the two of them. And this is one of the few, not one of the few, but one of the clearest cases in the screenplay, in the film, where the film is exactly the way I wrote it. It was not improvised, nothing was added or subtracted. It was exactly the way I always dreamed it would be. And so I'm so happy it's in the movie. You know, and it is part of the evolution of Ernesto as a doctor and someone who says he wants to be useful. But you know, I was really intrigued by the possibilities between the two of them as a man and woman.
Te quiero ser útil de alguna manera.
Estás perdiendo el tiempo.
¿Por qué?
Esta vida es un calvario.
Y sí, es bastante jodida. Hay que luchar por cada bocanada de aire y mandar la muerte al carajo.
We had to go through a lot of the hijinks, you know, to sort of, you know, illustrate these two men's thirst and love of life and desire for sheer experience. And I think being a doctor, I think for Ernesto Guevara, this fictional character and probably the historical character being a doctor, brought death very, very close to him on a daily basis. So, in this character in the film, for him, death is never very far away. And because he was asthmatic, and there are times in the film where it feels like he's going to just asphyxiate, he's going to die, that the specter of death was always nearby for him. And I do believe, even though I wrote those lines, they're not from any other source, I do believe his philosophy was you kind of have to tell death to go to hell and just live your life. And I know actually from the readings that I've done, that was in a way Fidel Castro's attitude too. It's like, if they're gonna get me, they're gonna get me, and I don't care. Death can go itself, basically. And so I thought in that intimate scene between two total strangers, it would be really interesting to introduce that idea between the two of them, because I think she, in her condition, would completely understand it and completely find some solace, because what she needs more than anything is to be healed. And what he's doing is trying to heal her without touching her, heal her with his words and with his ideas. And they do bond, and that bond grows greater because she doesn't want to get operated on. And after this encounter, she agrees to the operation, which helps her. And so it has a huge impact. So in Ernesto's book, that is one line. It was like, we went to a party, I hit on a girl, her husband got mad at me. That was almost the entire, and so from there, I wrote a pretty concise scene between the two of them, and then Walter invented a whole world around it. It was indicated in the script that it's a dance of some kind, but Walter just went to town and found this amazing band and all these people to dance, and really created a society. Like you really feel the culture of this place, living in front of us. So I chose that just to show that, that you could take just one grain of an idea and expand it into a scene, and how this particular director took that scene and made like a whole little world out of it. This is really interesting because this is a scene that in my screenplay is very, very descriptive. There's no words of dialogue, obviously. And it was sort of like my wanting to sort of like craft on the page a piece of pure cinema. So the screenplay talks about the mist and talks about the bodies and the wave and, the emotions of the moment. And, it's just one of those times when Walter, being as good as he is as a filmmaker, not only captured what I wrote, but just went far beyond it. I think it's just a gorgeous scene. In my first draft, the scene was a little different because what happened in real life was that the lepers put together a little orchestra. And so the guys were on their raft, and the raft approaches them with the lepers themselves playing instruments and serenading them as they go off. And I thought that was really cool. And Walter liked it as well, but he felt it was a little too jaunty, a little too fun and celebratory, and he was going for a different tone of almost a spiritual goodbye, as opposed to let's have a celebration and a party. And so it was interesting because he chose to ignore my screenplay at that moment and really sort of concentrate on where it felt more spiritual and almost metaphysical, and the characters look like ghosts as they disappear. I just love that shot of the hands waving in the air. It's just just pure cinema at that point. I do think of adaptations as an art form. And so what you're creating is a unique, one-of-a-kind, never to be duplicated work of art. And that requires the same amount of intense creativity as that you would for starting from scratch. And so, you know, I was lucky to be able to be working from a source that provided ample opportunity for action and conflict and comedy. And so I was really lucky not to have to create a lot of story. But there isn't a single word of dialogue in the Motorcycle Diaries, the book itself. You know, he doesn't quote himself, he doesn't, you know, so all the dialogue in the film is invented. And so that gave me the opportunity to sort of like flex my creative muscles, you know. And, you know, ultimately, this film is the examination of the inner life of somebody for whom history becomes very important later on. And I really wanted to get into that inner life, you know, into the psychology. And the only way I could really do that is to sort of, you know, invent moments and put words in his mouth, you know, and thoughts in his head that may or may not have existed. You know, my feeling is like and this has actually come up in a previous panel. Somebody asked a question about cultural appropriation, you know, and my answer to the question was about my personal belief in absolute and complete artistic freedom for artists, that there should be no boundaries. Black writers should be able to write white characters, white writers should be able to write Latino characters, men should be able to write women, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's a controversial view, and I know it's subject to discussion, but I am a champion of complete artistic freedom. And you know, in my career, I've written every kind of person there is, you know, and I think that the key to being able to do that is extreme empathy and respect, you know, for the differences, and to approach the writing with that empathy and that respect. Starting out, you know, just because I came from the theater, but I had no film credits or TV credits, so I was like a blank slate. And my managers and my agents were trying to figure out what to do with me in the business. And so they constantly pitched me for these gang stories because I have a Latin last name. And it's like, you know, I finally said to my agents, like, dude, I grew up on Long Island, you know. I'm, you know, I have no gang in me. And even in the theater, as a young actor, you know, people would want to cast me as a, you know, a heroin addict and things like that. And it's like, you know, and it's just sort of like, you know, it's a tired racist stereotype of Latins that as a young writer, I said to myself, I will not be part of it. Not only is it not part of my experience, and I wouldn't know where to begin, I don't believe I want to perpetuate that image. You know, I don't want to be part of the machinery that tells America that Latins are dangerous people and we're rapists and we're, you know, drug addicts. So I turned down those jobs, and, you know, I was amazed I was not fired by my agents for that, but I did turn them down. And when the Motorcycle Diaries came up, I thought, well, this is the kind of Latin story I want to work on. You know, I want to work on the humanity of people as opposed to the stereotypes of people. In the crafting of the Motorcycle Diaries, you know, one of the major turning points is very small, but it's incredibly major, which is when the motorcycle breaks down for the last time, and they basically say goodbye to the motorcycle and continue on foot. And that is where things really get interesting. Is that not when they're zooming by the countryside, but when they're on foot interacting with people. You know, interacting with indigenous people, the miners, the lepers, and all that. But all of that is told in increments. It's the exchange of a smile. It's a handshake. It's, you know, two words pass between them. You know, one of my favorite moments in the scene with the miners is when they offer him their mate to drink. You know, it's just like a beautiful moment of communion between two people.
Mate.
Gracias.
Esos ojos tenían una expresión oscura y trágica. Nos contaron de unos compañeros que habían desaparecido en circunstancias misteriosas.
So those, to me, like, the reason I like movies is for those moments.
You've been watching a conversation with Jose Rivera on Story. Story is part of a growing number of programs in Austin Film Festival's Story project, including the Story PBS series, now streaming online, the Story radio program and podcast in collaboration with Public Radio International, and the Story book series available on Amazon. To find out more about Story and Austin Film Festival, visit onstory.tv or austinfilmfestival.com.